A shock more numbing than ice paralyzed him as the stag took 2 trembling steps backward, and, with a huff of misty breath, collapsed against the well. Queen Ayara stood in triumph, bow held out for all to see, and everyone did see, since they were all still caught in the after effects of the commingled spell. Rowan gasped. "Ayara betrayed us! She betrayed the realm!" With a guttural roar, Garruk shoved through the crowd and leaped for Ayara, swinging his axe. He was too close to miss, and Ayara hadn't heard him coming, distracted by her desire to gloat over the stag's mortal wounding. The axe fell, slashing hard down across her back, but the elf queen wasn't there anymore. A raven flapped skyward, barely avoiding the hiss of the blade. With a furious shout, Garruk swung around. A riderless griffin snapped to attention. It spread its wings and leaped after the raven, rising fast, ready to rake the bird out of the sky. The raven swelled outward to become an icy, inky cloud that transformed into a drake. The griffin hooked one of its scaled legs with a talon. With its powerful tail, the drake slapped the griffin along its head so hard the blow stunned it. The griffin's falling body tore a splintering gash through the roof of the cottage. The altercation gave Garruk time to get under the airborne drake, raising his axe to slice at its underbelly. But the drake whipped around and swooped out of range by plunging into the ice and lightning-numbed throng. Lashing its tail from side to side, it knocked down riders and toppled mounts. Their tumbled bodies formed a barrier Garruk could not move swiftly past. Will watched in horror. By casting their magic in the hope of saving their father, he and Rowan had instead aided Oko. Garruk wasn't beaten yet. Hundreds of crows spilled out of the branches to mob the drake, blinding it with sheer numbers, pecking at its eyes and vulnerable throat. Garruk shoved through the chaos, flinging people aside as he raced for the shapeshifter with death in his eyes. Rowan dismounted and ran toward the struggling drake, now pinned to the ground by the staggering number of crows. "Garruk, don't kill him! Ardenvale Knights helped me capture this wretch!" Will no longer cared about Oko. He slid out of the saddle. Somehow, of course, his mother had been first to shake free of her children's magic. She knelt beside the stag, cradling its noble head on her lap. As he came up, she cast him a stern look. "Go help your sister!" Rowan reached the embattled drake and grabbed its tail with both hands. What was she thinking? A drake could rip her head off in a heartbeat. Will sprinted toward her. He tried to pull ice into his hands, but he was still drained from the earlier casting. Garruk reached her first. The hunter loomed up beside her, his axe blade catching the first light of the rising sun with a glint that flashed in Will's eyes. "Stop!" she shouted at Garruk, refusing to let go of the drake's tail. "You can't kill Oko. We can't let the realm or the wilds think Ayara or my mother is responsible." Will found a pinch of ice to cast at the drake, hoping to slow any attempt Oko would make to shapeshift again. Rowan's hands shone as she sent a surge of lightning through the scaled body, the shock of it amplified by Will's ice. The drake shuddered and twisted, but Rowan did not let go. As the crows flapped and cawed, more crows flying in to take the place of those shaken off, crushed, or bitten. Will dove, grabbing for one of the drake's legs. Ardenvale Knights arrived, each grabbing legs, tail, battering wings, anything to hold down the struggling beast. Some were flung aside, some torn by the drake's claws, but even so, their combined efforts were too much for it as they pinned it to the ground. The edges of the drake's form frayed like cloth, as if it were starting to come apart, where solid flesh unraveled into darkness. The knights lost their grip and stumbled. A cloud of turbulent darkness spun faster and faster until the creature lost all semblance of its old form. In a whoosh-like air expelled by a bellows, the drake transformed into the elf they'd first met on Choking Drum. His face was smeared with dirt, and he bled from dozens of pinpricks on his skin where the crows had pecked and clawed him. Rowan still held Oko's wrist, while Will lay on the dirt with both hands gripping one of the elves' ankles. Garruk stalked toward them. Rowan shifted to place herself between Oko and the axe.
"Move aside!"
Garrick growled, but he did not cut her down, and of course, she did not move. She would never let anyone intimidate her, not even a man who could cut off her head with a single blow. She would do what was right, just as their father and mother always did. She said loudly and clearly enough for the words to carry across the glade. "We have to bring him to justice. That's how we do it in the realm." "We're not so different, you and I," said Oko with a gentle smile. "I'll not forget you saved my life, Rowan Kenrith, even though it means I've incurred a debt, and I hate incurring debts. But since we'll never meet again, there's no chance I'll have to repay it." "I haven't saved your life? You will be brought to justice at the tribunal for your crimes?" "Not today." Light glittered in his eyes like shards of metal falling through a bowl of sunlight. One instant, Will gripped an ankle. The next, Oko had vanished. A drake's sharp tooth spun in the air, shifting to become a black feather that lifted on the wind for an instant before transforming into the distinctive golden feather of a crested eagle. The spinning feather became the tine of an antler, and then it all disintegrated into sparks. Oko was gone. Rowan turned all the way around, seeking high and low for any trace of an animal moving. Where did he go? What did he change into? Garrick lifted his head to sniff at the air, then he lowered his axe. "He's walked out of your reach, Rowan Kenrith, but not out of mine." Elfra's horn pierced a rising rustle of noise as the numbing power of the twin spells dissolved. The ringing call reverberated into the sky. Will jumped to his feet, drawing his sword, but the riders in the hunt knelt, obedient to their leader's signal. His mother's voice rang out. "Stand down, knights of the Ardenvale!" She still knelt on the ground with the stag. Will and Rowan ran over to her, knights and even elvish hunters stepping out of their way. It was so much worse than he had feared. Blood soaked the queen's tabards, stains forming ghastly blotches on its silver and white fabric. How could any creature lose so much blood and survive? The stag's eyes were open, fixed on Lyndon's face without fear, with total trust. Will's legs grew weak. He braced himself on the well, then saw the skull and the gleaming sword, and snatched his hand away from the rough stone. Rowan said desperately, "No." But the word faded on the wind because it had no power. All they could do was watch. Lyndon's gaze lifted from the stag as a figure pushed through the ranks of the silent hunt. Queen Ayara emerged from the assembly and strode to the well, bow in hand. Rowan and Will looked toward Garrick, who had followed them over, but he shook his head. This was really Ayara. As she halted before them, Will noticed the golden brooches in the shape of goblets pinned to the lapels of her hunting jacket. The Ayara who had shot the stag had worn no such brooches. Oko had missed that detail, just as he had missed the scar over Kato's eye. A rigidly calm tone, Lyndon said, "I did not know you took part of the midwinter hunt, Ayara. Is not a piece of my life I share with humans? Is that why you stayed hidden in the back when my knights and I arrived?" Lyndon asked coolly. "Because you didn't want us to see you?" "I'm surprised you concern yourself with my behavior when your beloved spouse lies dying before you. If the stag really is Alginus Kenrith transformed, how can you be sure?" "I'm glad you asked," cried Elwyn, raising both arms with an excited smile that made Will wince at how inappropriate it was. The lore mage didn't notice. "That fellow, Oko, is not merely a shapeshifter. As I discovered myself, he can shapeshift any other person into the same shape as he himself is taking if he is touching them. When he does it, isn't that remarkable?" "This isn't the time," said Lyndon. Undaunted by the queen's harsh tone, Elwyn went on. "A spell like this will probably be broken by death, so when the stag dies, we will know for sure it is Kenrith if the animal transforms back into the man." Rowan pressed her hands over her mouth. Will said quietly, Mother, you're a healer. Can't you heal him? Ayara's usually aloof expression was cracked with a faint wrinkle of concern, odd to see on that ageless face. I believe Queen Linden's magic does not extend to healing a mortal wound. It does not, said Linden gravely. How can you know the wound is mortal? Rowan demanded. Why is everyone just standing around, as if there's nothing that can be done? Ayara's cold gaze studied the young woman as she might study an ant. We elves can taste dying on the air, as the essence of a spirit leaks out of living flesh. You humans have not enough sensitivity to the world. Anyway, a blow inflicted by the winter hunt is always fatal. Rowan grasped Will's hand. Ayara was still speaking. I will say this much, Linden. If Alginus must die, then I am sorry to see him go. He was fair-minded, for one of humankind. As she spoke, her cousin, Lady Elfra, approached with a stately glide, as graceful as if her feet did not quite touch the earth. Her bearing was regal, and yet the crown of flower-wrapped thorns she wore atop her black hair seemed to mock of the royal circlet Linden wore atop her own head. Elfra took in the presence of a dying stag, and those who grieved for it. Nothing in her expression seemed troubled by the situation. I remain puzzled as to the identity of this stranger who stole Ayara's face and, as you claim, transformed two humans into animals. Where did he come from? Is there a missing clan of elves hiding in the realm? Do you know of him, Queen Linden? I don't think he's an elf, said Elwyn. I know nothing but what Elwyn has told me. He is a stranger to the realm as well. Then what is his purpose here? Rowan stepped forward belligerently. Will grabbed her arm before she could do anything rash, but he couldn't stop her from speaking. Oko knew it would start a war if you elves killed the High King. I am well aware he has been goading the reckless and foolish among the clans for months now. To set the realm against the wilds, Rowan shouted. Lady Elfra touched a finger to her lips, as if to enjoin silence. Her smile was amused, touched by an edge of cruelty. The wilds and the realm are already antagonists, child. But we are not enemies, said Linden. Elfra's chuckle was bitter. You split hairs, Queen of the Realm, but you are not incorrect. Let us not allow a stranger to dictate the terms of our relationship. What do you want, Lady Elfra? Linden asked in that same measured tone, although Will could not fathom how she was not sobbing and tearing at her hair with grief. The stag had begun to pant, as if it were running its last chase, pursued by implacable death. We live according to the law of nature. Those who die give way to those who will live, and the dying sun on its shortest day must be fed so it can grow again. Give us our blood, and we will depart in peace, taking our injured with us. If the hunt does not take his blood, then the fight will go on, and far more blood will be spilled in the years to come. Linden said nothing, but her gaze briefly shifted to look at the bucket swaying from the rope, at the skull, and the glowing sword. Will might not have noticed if he hadn't been closely watching her, trying to understand why she was just sitting there, as if there was nothing she could do, because this behavior wasn't like her at all. She was the one person who acted when all others lost their strength, their persistence, their loyalty, or their wisdom. Rowan, quivering against his grip, shook him off roughly. You can't mean it, Mother. There must be something you can do. You can't let Oko win like this. You can't let the hunt take his blood. It's rather fight. He is already dying, said Linden. We do what we must. No, cried Rowan. No! Is wrong? How can you just let them take him? Because it is what he would want. This is what it means to be worthy. The most powerful blood is that of a selfless ruler, or an innocent child. But a selfless ruler is a far rarer creature in the world, is it not? Said Elfra. Lyndon looked up at the tall elf. Though Lyndon was seated and the elf was standing, Lyndon did not look cowed or diminished. Her expression had a serenity that Will envied, and that confounded him. After a moment, Lyndon nodded. Elfra knelt, pressed the finger into a pool of the stag's blood, and licked it off her skin. Blood seals the year, she said, and stepped away. The elves came forward in a silent stream, their numbers blurring together. Will wept beside his sister as their father's life leached from him, drop by drop. Twilight stretched far past its normal allotment. The sun caught on the rim of the world, unable to rise until the spell woken by the hunt was brought to completion. Blood seals the year, for those who die give way to those who will live, and the dying sun on its shortest day must be fed so it can grow again. A heavy hand settled unexpectedly on Will's shoulder as Garruk stepped up beside him. Staring at the stag with a somber expression, with the curse lifted, the hunter's expression had altered. Maybe he wasn't a sophisticated, civilized man, but his face was lit by intelligence and compassion. Surely the beasts of the forest knew better than to trust the merely cruel and the casually brutal. Hunters could take selfishly and needlessly for the sport, or for boasting. Or they could hunt because hunting is part of the greater web of death and life. Garruk understood the wildwood, and in return, the wildwood trusted him. The riders of the hunt fed, and, one by one, slipped away into the wilds. Ayara was last to kneel. By now, the stag's breathing was slow and labored. Only a trickle of blood oozed from the wound. She caught a drop on a finger and lifted it to her lips. Still, Lyndon had said nothing. Her proud head bowed with solemnity, but not agony. Ayara stood, but she did not move away. Instead, she studied Lyndon with a narrow-eyed gaze. I think there is something you are not telling us, Queen Lyndon, she said in a familiar, almost comradely way. Lyndon did not look up, but her lips twitched with a swift, sly smile. I suppose I'll find out what it is soon enough. Ayara pulled a pair of riding gloves out of her belt and slipped them on her long-fingered hands. With a last tug, she paused to examine Garruk from head to toe. Do I know you? There's an energy swirling about you that reminds me of my lost cauldron. But that's not possible, is it? Garruk looked at Will, who tucked his chin down and gave a frantic shake of his head. Even with his father dying at his feet, he couldn't help but feel a spur of fear that Ayara would discover the truth and haul him off to Locktwain. The hunter met Queen Ayara's daunting gaze. You don't know me. Ayara was too long-lived and far too powerful to find the hunter's size and curtness intimidating. Her lips curled up with a lift of more than casual interest, one whose intensity Will hoped Garruk would not trust. Well then, brave hunter, feel free to visit Castle Locktwain any time. If any guest can thread my castle's maze, I expect it would be you. We rode away into the forest. When the last snap of hoof falls faded away, Lyndon raised a hand in command. The Griffin Knights had hoisted their wounded into the saddle and revived the stunned griffin that had smashed through the roof of the cottage. Obedient to the Queen's command, they flew into the heavens with a clamor of wings. Lyndon, Elwyn, the twins. Garruk alone remained with the stag. The sun's rim cracked the horizon, rays lanced across the glade to gild the stag's body. On a final exhale, the animal sagged, head dropping. As its last breath escaped, the body glimmered as with a heat distortion. The disintegrating shape-shifting spell flared. When the brightness faded to ordinary dawnlight, Alginus Kenrith in his human body lay dead on the ground. an arrow sticking out of his chest. Bloodstains splattered down his surcoat. Rowan choked and collapsed to her knees. Will was too numb to move. "I didn't really believe it," said Lyndon in a hoarse voice. "I didn't want to believe it." "That he's dead?" said Elwyn in a conversational tone whose breezy detachment made Will want to scream, but his voice had vanished. How could his mother have sat there so calmly? Why hadn't he protested more? If only he and Rowan had found the stag sooner. How could this have happened? How could it be true? "I didn't want to believe that when I found him after all those months he was missing, he was living in a cottage in the wilds with the woman he'd gotten with child. Had the secrets we'd confided to each other meant nothing to him? Was the quest whose hardships we'd shared so meaningless to him that he would abandon the realm?" You're speaking of your quest when you and he were young. He did go missing for a long time at one point. People thought he was dead. A witch fed him a love potion that stole his memory and his heart. That's exactly why you never eat food grown or brewed in the wilds, said Elwyn with a disapproving shake of her head. He should have known better. And to get her pregnant, too. What are you two talking about? Demanded Rowan. Our birth mother was killed tragically. In the wilds. Everyone says so. Her eyes got wide as she looked at the skull that had a questing sword stuck through one of its eye sockets. She grabbed Will's hand, fingers crushing his in a distraught grip. He struggled to breathe, because all at once he felt as winded as if he'd been running for leagues and leagues on a path that was inexorably leading him off a cliff. Lyndon got to her feet rather more slowly than she would have when she was a young, dashing knight. The weight of years and children and ruling lent her dignity, but had leached some of her famous agility and speed. She turned to the well and its dangling bucket and grasped the hilt of the sword. With a grunt, she scraped it out of the eye socket of the skull. Dislodged, the skull fell into the shaft. Will and Rowan could not help but lean over the lip to stare down. The well was dry and only about 3 yards deep. A skeleton lay jumbled at the bottom. The queen extended an arm, using the sword's length to point toward the cottage. Lord Mage, if you would please, set it on fire. I tried to burn it down the day I found him here, but I couldn't because the witch's hex protected itself even in death, as we have seen today. Your magic leeches through spells, even one set on you. Indeed, indeed. Fortunate for all that a spell-leeching hex was set on me as a child. The hex was meant to strip me of my magic and make me vulnerable and weak. Instead, it made me into the lore mage I am today. No magic can stick in my bones, and thus I can wander the wilds knowing the most hexes and spells will not affect me, or not for long. I might have remained a crested eagle for the rest of my life if not for that. Strange how events do not always work out as we expect. A spray of flares and pops, like fireworks, sparkled inside the cottage. With a whoosh, the structure went up in crackling, ferocious flames. A sickly thread of smoke swirled out of the well. It formed into the figure of a comely woman with long, pale hair and open, welcoming arms. Lyndon hissed between her teeth, expression tightening with old anger. But the smoke could not hold its shape. It unraveled into writhing strands and began to frantically circle the cottage as if desperately trying to put out the fire. Lyndon's jaw quivered as she turned away from the cottage burning in sullen fury. He held the blade over Alginus's blonde head, but she addressed her children. The day I found your father in this glade, he was carrying a bucket to the well. He did not recognize my face, nor did he know my name, so I kissed him I truly loved him enough to delay my quest for the high throne to find him where he went missing for so long. Him or his remains. I just wanted to know. She pressed her lips together as memories chased through her head. My kiss woke him to himself. He realized he had spent a year in the witch's thrall. That bucket he carried was awash with the blood of his own infant children. The witches who birthed you, Rowan and Will. A witch who wanted a baby only because she desired innocent blood to brew an elixir that would give her a longer life. You were both dead when we found you, drained of the blood she intended to store in the well and drink as from a spring of immortality. How could we have been dead? Will whispered. Sweat broke on his face. His vision blurred as he stared at his hands. They were living hands, with calluses from training and a scar on his slightly crooked right pinky finger from the time it had gotten slammed in a closing door. Rowan said nothing, fists pressed against her mouth as she stared at her living mother and her dead father. No one can gain 5 knighthoods without dying at least once. The questing beast knows this. Only the questing beast can forge a sword that can revive its wielder. 1 life is granted to those chosen for the royal quest. I gave the life in my sword to heal you too. But if you gave the life to us, then is that why you never became High Queen? Lyndon brushed fingers against Rowan's cheek. My dear daughter, I made the only choice I could. What happened to the witch? Said Will grimly. His mother's breath came slow, harsh, and uneven. She had hung his sword over the hearth, I suppose as an act of scorn and contempt. When he came to himself, he killed her with it and threw her and the sword down the well. I confess, he went out of his mind with shame and rage that day. He took my sword and rode into the wilds. In his madness, he did not care whether he died with no hope of revival. He desired only to regain his honor, for he felt sullied by what happened to him. But I could not act so rashly, not with sickly twin infants who needed a mother, so I took you home. She swallowed. When Elwyn had brought me the news yesterday that you two had found him, and that he had been turned into a stag, as she had been into an eagle, I knew old instincts and the unresolved shame he has always felt would bring him here. The secret Ayara guessed that I know to be true. Before he fell prey to the witch, he had not died on his quest, which means there is 1 life in this sword. I give it to him now. He pressed the flat of the blade to the crown of his head. The flames roaring about the cottage abruptly flickered out, leaving a charred foundation. A gust of wind whirled through the threads of eerie smoke and tore them apart, as from a distance a crow cawed mournfully, and then the sound ceased. The sword began to glisten as hotly as if it was being newly forged in the magical furnace that had birthed it years ago. At the edge of the trees stalked a shadow with 3 long necks and 3 faces, 1 angry, 1 solemn, and 1 laughing. "Ooh, the questing beast!" Elwyn cried. "I never thought I'd see it for myself." The sun's light splintered the shadows, and after all, no beast walked there at all. It was only a memory. The sword's glow swelled, expanding to touch every surface in the glade with gold. The body on the ground took in a breath, and his eyes opened. "Lyndon? Rowan? Will?" He pressed a hand to his forehead, and with a cough sat up, then looked down at his blood-stained surcoat. The arrow lay on the ground, magically extracted from his body. "What happened? Where are we?" Rowan lowered her hands. She was trembling. At first, Will thought she was going to burst into tears. and then realized her terror and grief had transmuted into a storm of fury. "Why did you lie to us? Didn't you trust us to know the truth? Wouldn't that be the kind of thing you would want your children to know? By the way, Rowan and Will, the woman who gave birth to you was a witch, and her hex is bound into your very bones. Oh, and your father killed her after he'd been living with her for over a year. Thought you might like to know." Alginus Kenrith was renowned as a canny fighter, said to have a sixth sense for danger and a peculiarly keen ability to react at speed to changing surroundings. A glance acquainted him with Lyndon's composed but wary expression. The burned cottage, Elwyn's stare of avid interest, the disenchanted sword, and his children. It isn't always better to know every piece of an unpleasant truth, if the events happened before you could be aware of them, he said in his heartfelt, guileless voice he used habitually. Will had never quite been able to decide if the voice was an act or a genuine expression of his father's character. "You don't think that's something we needed to know?" Rowan shouted, gesticulating wildly. "That we deserved to know?" "What good would it have done to tell you about a sordid episode you could do nothing to change? It makes no difference to our feelings for you and your brother. But were the truth to get out, it might make a great deal of a difference to how other people treat you. And we didn't want to take that chance." As he extended his hands, one to Rowan and one to Will, he and Lyndon exchanged a look. An unspoken trust shared between them across the years. "We wanted to protect you," their father finished, with a rueful smile. Will's arm twitched. In a moment, he would reach out and take his father's hand. All would be forgiven. They had gotten the High King back, had they not? Their quest had succeeded. That was all that mattered. Rowan pulled her hands in tight against her body. "Protect us?" she scoffed. "You were just protecting yourself." The High King winced as if a barb of truth had pierced his skin. "Rowan," said Lyndon sternly, "I think it best if—" "No, it's not even that you didn't trust us. It's worse than that, isn't it? You were too ashamed to tell us. You were afraid people would find out about your sordid episode and judge you as not being the perfect, truthful, loyal, just High King everyone thinks you are. But Mother's the one who saved our lives at great cost to herself. You rode off because you cared more about your precious honor than you did about us." He turned on Lyndon. "And you went along with it to spare his reputation. I don't think either of you have any respect for us at all." Rowan's eyes blazed. He was going to do something rash and irrevocable. Just thinking about it made Will go dizzy and hot and cold in quick succession. "Ro, calm down," he said, grasping her arm. "This isn't—" A coruscating cascade of lightning spun up her arms and wove deep into her flesh until she was too bright to look at. Deep in his body, a wave of bone cold swelled outward, reaching for the lightning to join with it. Light and ice burst over them, onto them, through them. The grip of a storm so powerful it could not be resisted ripped Will and Rowan away from the quiet dawn and the smell of embers. It was as if a door opened below them or above them, and they fell upward or outward, yanked into an utterly familiar place that he comprehended instantly and horribly was not part of the realm or the wilds, somewhere unfathomably far away from everything he knew and loved. The last thing he heard before the world vanished was Garrock's low whistle and the hunter's rumbling voice. Didn't expect that."